Well, does that mean we're on?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello there.
So Samian
We
and
need to
Brian,
record. My thing's not saying record.
yeah, Sammy and Brian, this is Lori. If the live streaming is the problem, could we move ahead with the Zoom webinar and record it?
The live streaming is going.
It is going. Okay, so are we ready for the meeting?
But we need to record it
I
though.
think it's recording.
Almost there. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Just in time, Mike. I'd like to call the City of Kenmore Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, September 20th, 2022 to order. Our first item on the agenda is public comments. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission's meeting. In this forum, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests first, followed by our virtual guests. If you are online, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address comments to the chair and city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all community members, we must limit each speaker to 3 minutes. Please state your name and city of residence for the record and keep your comments to the allotted time, which is 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset the time except by express approval of the presiding officer. Screen sharing is not allowed. You may submit materials to the Planning Commission or clerk in advance. Materials submitted after the meeting will be provided to the Commission for the next meeting. Please do not comment about pending development projects on which the Planning Commission or City Council will make future decisions, as those are quasi-judicial matters, and the planning commissioners and council members must limit their communication about such matters. This meeting is being recorded, and thank you for taking the time to express your comments. There is nobody here present to speak to us. Do we have anyone online?
We have no virtual commenters.
Right, last chance, folks online. Well, if you see someone come up before we go into the main, we'll just go back and get them. Okay, if that's okay with the majority of the commissioners. Okay, like those, we can all see everybody's head nod there now. That's good. So approval of minutes. I did have a first question about the minutes before the ones that are before us. because it says on our minutes that the minutes were approved, which they were, but they were approved as amended because we had put Derek on the excused list. So I want to make sure that that amendment is on the prior minutes. Okay? So now before us, that's just a point of information, so, right?
Can you clarify the specific date?
The date, say that?
I think it was August.
August 16th, we believe. Okay. So now I know there is one change that Derek would like to make.
Yes, regarding the minutes from our previous meeting that we're approving right now, I would like noted that in reference to the mention of golf carts, that the wording is golf carts or alternative single occupant vehicle. We wanted the wording to clearly state golf carts and optional single occupant vehicle. Wanted to make sure that was an and.
Is there any objection to that clarification for the minutes? Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, if there's no objection, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent as amended. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, did we find any new raised hands out in the crowd?
No, we do not.
Okay, great. So I believe somewhere in the cloud, there is Ms. Anderson that is just chomping at the bit to go over the memo. And then we're going to run through all these attachments and get this done because you want it done so we can go to hearing, correct?
That is correct.
So time is yours.
Thank you very much. So good evening, Chair Thompson and members of the Planning Commission. I first wanted to thank Brian Randall and Sammy Ruin for sitting in tonight for Rita, who was unable to be here. Anyway, they're doing her job for her tonight, and we very much appreciate that. Tonight, we, as Chair Thompson mentioned, are going to look at the transit-oriented development code changes. And you've seen these at 2 previous meetings, but this is the full package. And what I hope to do tonight, this is an unusual approach. Usually we look at these large sets of amendments by exception. But tonight I'm recommending that we go through page by page so that I can explain why the changes were made and answer your questions as we go through. I'll only hit the highlights, so I don't think it will be too cumbersome. But with your permission, I would like to proceed that way.
So we're talking about changes from our last meeting, correct?
Right. We would be looking at all of the changes in attachment 1, focused on the blue changes, which were the changes that you have not seen since your last meeting.
So then the rest of the stuff that is not different, we're just going to skip over, correct?
Right. I mean, we'll look at it because we would go page by page, but
Right,
I'm
of
going to
course.
focus on the blue language.
Right. Is there any objection from the commission? Hearing none, let's do it.
Okay. Again, the reason that we're looking at this full package is that I hope tonight we can confirm that October 18th would be the public hearing on the amendments. And we would have one more meeting between now and then, but this would allow us to advertise the meeting earlier so that we can get public involvement and also send the proposed changes out to those who participated on the developer panel in February. And why we want to hold the hearing in October is because we're still trying to aim for regulations in place before expiration of the interim regulations that's related to the moratorium that was put in place. That happens in January. And although it seems like we have a long time, we don't have that much time to get it in front of the city council and have it ready for them to adopt in January, since they don't meet during December. So that's kind of that timeline we're working with. With that, I am going to share my screen, and I hope you can and everyone see this? I'm seeing
Yes.
nodding heads. Okay, so this is attachment 1 to your agenda packet for this evening. And as we discussed, new or deleted text in yellow is text you've previously seen. The changes since your August 16th meeting are in blue, and that includes not just changes you requested on August 16th, but also incorporation of the affordable housing regulations that you talked about with Mike Stanger, with Arch. And by the way, I think Mike Stanger is in this meeting, and he may also need to be promoted to a panelist if he is in the audience. So I pass that along. Okay, so we'll start. As you know, there are several zoning districts that underlie the current TOD overlay. And so our first approach was to take standards from the TOD overlay and put them into these underlying zones. And the first one we'll look at is urban corridor. That zone has 2 sub areas. One is west of downtown, and that's not one that we're dealing with. And then east of downtown, urban corridor is within the TOD overlay. So paging down, the first change I wanted to point out is that in this chart where we list uses that are permitted or conditionally permitted, we've noted that a standalone townhouse development is prohibited. The current moratorium does not allow standalone townhouse developments. That was in fact the whole purpose of the moratorium, to prevent that development type so that we would get a higher density. However, we didn't want to completely prohibit townhouses, since sometimes developments are designed that may have a lot of apartments and then some townhouses associated with them. For example, the Spencer 68 project on 68th, that Main Street project, includes both apartments and some townhouse developments. And I think Commissioner Vanderlyn has his hand up.
Yes, Lori, I was just going to ask, can you increase the font size or something on the display for us old folks?
Oh, okay. Let me see what I can do here.
Thank you.
What you can do is hit control and then scroll up or down, and that'll do it.
Oh, thank you, Chair Thompson. You are always so helpful with things.
And also after Mr. Vanderling, Mr. Lutz would like to speak to.
I just had a quick question, Lori.
Sure.
When it
Wait a
comes,
minute, Mike's first.
oh, sorry about that, Mike.
No, that was my only comment. I'm fine.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I didn't
Yeah,
understand.
my apologies. When it came to that comment about standalone townhouse developments being prohibited and the permitted uses of multiple family dwelling, where do duplexes, triplexes, and missing middle forms of housing fall? Are they defined as multiple family dwellings, or are they single detached dwelling units within this sort of chart?
Yes, they are defined as multiple family dwellings, but I would be, that's a good point, Commissioner Lutz. So what I need to do is double check that we're not inadvertently also allowing duplexes, triplexes, and missing middle housing, unless it's also in a, I should probably clarify this, excluding duplexes, triplexes.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, that was my main question, because I saw that townhouses were specified, and I was curious where duplexes and triplexes would fall around that. I did have another quick question about prohibited uses, and maybe we'll go into depth a little bit later. But I guess more or less grandfathering in, is there a provision about grandfathering in current properties or property
Current
uses?
properties that don't conform to the zoning code are always grandfathered. And then
Okay.
that's a whole different section of the zoning code. And
Okay.
then if they are making significant alterations, then the question of whether the use is still permitted comes up. But there's nothing that needs to be added to
Okay.
this chart to
Thank you.
reference that.
Of course,
Mhm.
no, awesome. That's great to hear. Thank you.
And technically, they're called non-conforming
Right,
use, correct?
correct.
In their little title.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. The zoning standards you've seen previously. At your last meeting, the discussions settled on an 85-foot height limit in that area, but the concern was the impacts to the heron rookery. And so you asked that we create a new footnote, which is right here in blue, that says that the habitat management plan must be created. And then in particular, potential impacts related to the flyway and shadowing of nest trees has to be evaluated. The city manager may require adjustments to building height or orientation to protect the rookery. The city manager here in parentheses is defined as the city manager or his or her designee, and most typically it's the development services director. But basically this says the habitat management plan will tell us what an appropriate height and building orientation is to continue to protect the heron rookery. All right. These next set of changes had to do with
Chair Thompson. May I ask a question, please?
Tracy, go ahead.
Okay. Lori, regarding the heron rookery language, is there a reason that it's that we use the language may require? I mean, it feels like it probably will require an adjustment from the maximum building height.
Well, I would not use the word will because we don't know what the habitat management plan will say. And this is affecting a number of properties, and it may be that building height isn't the issue, building orientation is the issue. So I personally would not recommend putting in will require adjustments, because I think what we're trying to do is to rely on the scientific analysis to tell us what adjustments need to happen, if any.
Anything more? Okay, go ahead, Lori.
Okay. All right. Again, the yellow text you previously reviewed, this has to do with clarifying the difference between that west subarea that I talked about and the east subarea. So connectivity requirements. This language is new to the urban corridor zone, but is directly from the TOD standards. So we've just moved that into the regulations. Similarly, the affordable housing requirements, we have a new section about that. And then design requirements, this is the first place I think where this appears. So I wanted to call this out. We say that the urban corridor zone should comply with the provisions of the design standards, but we've used the design standards in a number of different zones, which aren't all downtown. And I think for purposes of clarity, that it's time that we clean that up. So I am recommending that we take out the word downtown design standards and just say design standards. They apply to commercial areas, for example, down on Juanita. They apply in the urban corridor zone, etc. So it's not a change to what those standards are. It's just referencing that it's beyond downtown at this point.
Is there any objection? Okay, go ahead.
All right. Okay, the downtown commercial zone. In the TOD overlay, there's only, I think there are 2 properties that have downtown commercial zoning. One is the Mary's Place property, and one is actually there may be three, the Montessori School, and then the St. Vincent de Paul site. So these changes, although those three parcels are in the TOD, these changes would affect all of the downtown commercial zone. So this is when we talk about extending the TOD standards to downtown. This also would impact the downtown commercial zoning that is west of 73rd Avenue Northeast. So we've applied minimum density, the same as in the TOD overlay, but we've noted that that would be for standalone multifamily proposals only. And that's important because we could have an office building, for example, that was 3 stories of office, and then they have space and they put some housing on top, but they couldn't possibly meet in a mixed use project this minimum density. So we wanted to clarify that. That's the purpose of the blue language. Back to the height issue. Here's the 85 feet that we've been talking about. But this height, interestingly, height was used to incentivize structured parking. And I think in downtown that's an important characteristic. So as you can see, the base height, which is the maximum unless you do something else, is 65 feet. That's a significant increase from the current height limit, which is 35 feet. And then you can go to 85 feet if you provide structured parking. Okay. And Commissioner Bonashinsky has a question, Chair Thompson.
No, I don't.
Oh, no.
Oh, who has?
It's hard when you can't see all of us.
Yeah, go ahead and speak up who has the
Okay.
question.
Yeah, Lori, this is not about a yellow or blue highlighted piece of text. I'm curious if you can talk about how the maximum impervious surface percentage was determined.
Yeah, I cannot say specifically how it was determined, but I know that in the downtown, the idea was that the higher impervious surface was necessary because we don't always require setbacks. Buildings may be built side to side. They're very close to the sidewalk, so that the higher impervious surface percentage is what has been in place probably since, I would say, 2003. And I think this is the highest impervious surface percentage of all of the zoning districts. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I tried to do some reading on how jurisdictions determine this, and I could find very little on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have a very good basis in literature, what's already been decided or what the scientific bases are, but 90% seems so high to me with what we know about stormwater runoff. And I wonder if there's a way to make way for more green water infrastructure if a certain percentage of a property, had to be set aside for like a bioswale or something.
Yeah, one thing I can say is that I think it was in 2015 when as part of the permits the city has to get related to stormwater, that Richard Sawyer and his group, the surface water group, went through all of the impervious surface standards and then did drop them in a number of places. And they did that with the opportunity to, or with incentives to do green stormwater types of activities. So I know that they have looked at that. Again, this is downtown, and you think of any downtown where we're looking at, wall-to-wall buildings, parking, structured parking, and that I think the opportunity for doing a lot of that kind of surface water control may be less than in other zones where there's more green space. But the commission can talk about that. I would want to get input from surface water before any changes were made, but I'm happy to do that.
Is this something we would have to do in time? We'd have to do it in time for the hearing. You feel like there's time for that?
Yeah, I think I could certainly ask Richard Sawyer about his perspective on that and how stormwater in the downtown is handled. I can ask that question and we can discuss it at the next meeting.
Well, if there's interest among commissioners, I would be interested in that discussion.
Are you all done? Are you finished?
Yes, I'm done. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lori.
Mhm.
Um,
Commissioner Vanderland has his hand up.
Who?
Commissioner Vanderland.
Commissioner Vandeline?
Yes. Tracy, I think you raise an interesting point. I would be interested if we actually get into this in any depth, having some, what are some alternatives to decreasing the 90%? Certainly, there's a lot of opportunities coming out through new green construction techniques. Is there any history out there today of offering property owners or developers some sort of tax credit for developing any kind of green approaches that would reduce the surface water or otherwise come into the same effect as reducing the percentage would? I could see that, that might help us with the developer and help the developer maintain their costs. And if the city is truly interested in that, would pass the cost of that on through the tax reduction.
That was directed to you, Lori.
I think
That bit of rambling makes sense, Lori.
well, I don't know the answer to that, but
Yeah, I know neither do I.
If I assume that a majority of commissioners agree that you want me to pursue this question, I'm happy to do so with Richard Sawyer, and I can talk with him about how stormwater is handled, what incentives there might be, what is the feasibility of reducing the impervious surface. I've heard from 2 commissioners. Do I have a sense that a majority of commissioners is interested in that discussion? Okay, got it. Okay, so I will pursue that question with Richard Sawyer, and we will bring responses back at your next meeting.
Maybe a simpler way to address this with the stormwater folks is, are they aware of any alternatives out there to reducing the percentage that would create the same results, the same benefits as reducing them?
Exactly.
Thank you.
Commissioner
Okay.
Lutzis.
Yeah, 2 quick points. Lori, I had a question about impervious surfaces. Is that covered or discussed at all in the city council's environmental element or the broader environmental plan?
The climate action plan?
The climate action plan, that's it.
I don't know if that specific language is there, but I certainly can pull that out and see.
It might be good to know, if we're having this discussion, if it's already being discussed at a higher level than us, then it's maybe something that we can forego.
Yeah.
Another little point I had was, I can't think of any bioswales that are present in the TOD as of right now. There are, I think, 3 south of 175th. And then as you get more north, there are more bioswales and retention ponds. But in terms of surface water infrastructure right now in the TOD, I believe that's already all been moved underground. But that's just a point to make. I'm sure Richard will go in depth on that coming forward, but that's just something to keep in mind, that infrastructure is already moved underground, and I don't know what it would mean to dig everything up and bring it up. Anyways, we'll see what Richard says.
Commissioner Banaszewski.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear what Richard said, but I don't want to discount the fact I think we can layer green stormwater infrastructure over, more engineered stormwater solutions, and it actually might be good for the stormwater to go through a more natural process before it gets piped into engineered processes. So I wouldn't want to count it out just because of that.
Commissioner Wyckoff whispered in my ear, sort of whispered. And he made a very good point that there are new construction methods that such as pervious cement and other methods to allow water to go through and into the ground. So is that done through design standards, or where does that go, Lori?
Yeah, that would go in the definition of impervious surface, and that may already be in the regulations. But again, I'm not an expert on this topic by any means, so I need to go to the expert, get the answers to your questions, and then bring them back.
I would think certainly if we're talking 90%, we have to look at everything we can get. So, all right.
Okay, I'm
Go
gonna share the screen again. It's so difficult to share the screen and then you all can't see each other. So I'm probably gonna jump in and out of this several times. But here we go again. All right. So we've talked about this. Then the public and semi-public zone. This is the zoning that applies over the Metro Park and Ride. And what we did here was to add multiple family dwelling as a permitted use to allow housing on the Park and Ride site. And therefore, we added that same footnote about a standalone townhouse development. And then down under, let's see. Oh, here. On the Park and Ride site, we added in the new standard about 25% very low or low income affordable housing units. That's where you could do achieve the multifamily use. And then down here, base height continues to be 35 feet. We didn't want to change that because that is the PSP zone appears throughout the city. And then this is existing language about heights in other parts of the city. So we brought this back, but added in the Great Blue Heron Rookery information for the properties on SR 522. Okay, and then again, the connectivity requirement from the TOD overlay, we added that to the PSP zone for that property on SR 522. Then we have a whole series of residential zones in the TOD overlay that we are putting into a new zone, urban residential zone. We've talked about this previously. And so these standards are—
Lori?
Yeah.
Lori?
Uh-huh.
So I just want to ask the commissioners, so we're going to be heading into the urban residential piece, chapter 1829, which is another chunk of this. Is there any further comments on the or amendments from the beginning of attachment 1, page 1 through page 12? Mr. Lutis.
Lori, I think this is already implied, but that second footnote referring to townhomes will also be amended to reference missing middle housing.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I can, you know, actually for that one, for PSP, I probably will not do that because there are PSP there are PSP properties that are in the R6 zone, for example, or close to it. And what we had said about other housing projects, other than those that are on 522, that they can be consistent with permitted residential densities in adjoining zoning districts. So for example, if you had a PSP property and next to it was R6 that allowed medium density, then that residential density could be applied to the PSP property. I think I would add it in a different place. I think your comment is good that for that property on SR 522, we should add that standard about not allowing it specifically there.
Thank
Does
you
that
for the
help?
clarification. Yes,
Mhm.
thank you.
So do you want that added, Commissioner?
Her discussion justification makes sense. For the first one, I think it would be good too, but as she just discussed about the PSP zone.
So you don't, oh, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
just want to make sure. Any other hands in the air, Madam Clerk? Okay, so
None at this time.
we're good on that one. So off we
Okay.
go to chapter 1829.
Right, okay. Urban residential zone. Let me get back down here. So this, what actually we did was just to take the whole TOD district overlay and convert it into the urban residential zone, excluding the R1 zoning area on the northern part of 73rd Avenue Northeast. We took that out of the options. And let's see where we come to blue text, we should see the same standalone townhouse prohibition. And again, the 85-foot maximum height, removal of downtown, and then some new footnotes. Previously, we talked about, you recommended that we acknowledge that if you were against the manufactured housing community zoning district, you should have the lower height for some distance, just as we did with R1, R4, and R6. Here's the Great Blue Heron Rookery footnote. And then the other footnotes are basically renumberings. And then this reference is a change to this section of the landscaping chapter, which we'll be getting to. It's a consistency issue, then renumbering. Then we have development containing residential units has to provide affordable housing, and that is all described in the affordable housing chapter. We remove downtown from design standards. Here are the connectivity requirements. And then we get to the affordable housing changes. These are more extensive, and the first place that you see some real changes is actually in the definitions. So the state and the county use different terms for different levels of affordability. And we've made everything match in the comprehensive plan, but in the zoning code currently, it doesn't match. So we have redefined these terms to match the state and countywide definitions. So low-income affordable housing unit is at or below 80%. That's no longer considered moderate. A very low income unit is at or below 50%, and an extremely low is at or affordable below 30%. So these percentages now match state and county percentages. So any questions about that?
So Lori, I think I'm just having an aha moment and I wanted to confirm. So the reason for rental housing is crossed out and then for ownership housing and all the below is crossed out. Are they, the definitions are now the same for rental or owning?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Correct. Now, where we run into trouble is that we have zones that already have requirements at different levels of affordability that have been created historically, and that we are not really in a position, given that we're making TOD changes, to adjust. So as we go through these, you will see that in some cases, we have gone to a percentage of affordability that's different from those standards. It's not 30, 50, or 80, it's 70, or it's 60, or it's something else. So in the downtown residential zone, this is a standard that already exists. This is not a new standard. But what we had to do, because we changed the definitions, we had to change the way it's phrased. So this is where there's a case where 70% or 80% if owner occupied. So this is not a change to the rules. This is just a clarification of the rules, so they match the current standards, but also acknowledge the new definitions. This is, I'm sorry if I'm not describing this very well, but what I can tell you is that this is not a change to the rules. When we get to the downtown commercial zone, it is a change because we don't have currently, except for this one parcel in the downtown residential zone that's already developed, standards throughout the downtown commercial zone. So this now says that 25% shall be very low income affordable housing units. That's the 50% threshold that we talked about on the 16th. Mike Stanger, who I think is here, then added in language about a higher level of affordability if those units were owner occupied. And Mike, I hope that you're a panelist now and that you could jump in here and describe the need for that. Is he here?
Sure. Yeah, wait for my camera to.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll let.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Mike.
I'm Mike
Thanks
Stanger
for
from
joining
ART.
us.
Sure. So we had allowed, well, not in this zone, I guess. Lori, you've done a beautiful job explaining things so far. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do as smoothly. But we wanted to provide for affordable homeownership opportunities as well. The economics of homeownership development and sales are different naturally than they are for rental. The city's MFTE program also does not provide for tax exemption for homeownership development. And so basically between, not offering the benefit of a tax exemption, the higher gap between market prices and affordable prices, and in the possibility that also home ownership would not have the same parking reduction. The effect is that an 80% AMI is a more appropriate and effective affordability level there. It's also in line with the home ownership affordability and programs that we administer in Kirkland and Bothell and so forth. So that's a pretty standard affordability level, and I believe it would be appropriate recommendation here. Did I forget anything, Lori?
No, thanks, Mike.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Are there any questions for Mike? Okay, we're ready to move on then, Lori.
Okay, here we go
Thank you,
again.
Mike.
All right. So then when we move to the urban corridor zone, it's a similar relationship. So here's the 25% at very low income. That's 50% if renter occupied, or low income if owner occupied. And we eliminated, you may recall that there was this very complicated formula for tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. This was so unmanageable in terms of the ability for development services staff to implement it. It was very difficult. So we've eliminated this whole tier system and gone just with 25 at 50 or the higher number for affordable, or I'm sorry, home ownership housing. Now here, community business zone Juanita subarea. This is pre-existing affordable housing requirement. So this is a case where we had to go to 70% because that's the current standard in that zone. And we were not in a position really to be amending the community business zone. So that's why this is a different number. And then there also was a way that the formula was calculated where if you had 2 units, it would count at a lower level of affordability. It would improve the numbers that you needed to provide. So again, that was adjusted based on a certain AMI to reflect the existing standard. Urban residential zone. Okay, so this is the one that took the place of, it's like R12 and R18, etc. Here, 25% shall be very low income affordable housing units. And that again is at 50%. Now this, I actually have to ask Mike a question because I was reading this today and I wasn't sure whether this should also include that higher level for homeownership housing. So I'm going to ask Mike to jump on and say, did I make a mistake when I wrote this? And should there have been should it have been a different level for the homeownership housing? Mike, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I lost track of my Zoom
Oh,
feed
no.
for a second. Yes, I noticed that earlier today.
Okay,
Just
good. We both
an
noticed
hour
it.
before the meeting. I think we forgot that to insert
Okay,
that there.
so staff is recommending then that we amend 1877-042 to reflect the different levels for the homeownership housing. Is the commission comfortable with that?
What's the level?
It's I believe this is very low, so I think it's low. It would be low
Yes, it would.
income for a homeownership opportunity, which isn't that 80%
80%
or less?
of median, right? Same as
Okay,
as
and
we
then
talked
what
about
the
earlier.
percentage of the, oh, we're just going to add to that indented paragraph is what you
Right,
want us-
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Is there any objection from any council member? Madam Clerk, do you see any nays on the screen?
I see no hands.
Okay, so it's adopted.
Okay, all right. Alternative compliance. There was a question asked at the last meeting about fee in lieu. One of the commissioners asked about how do you use fee in lieu? So Mike did a little bit of looking at how it has been used in other places. And so he was Mike, I think you were going to give an example from Redmond, maybe, about how if you allow, it's the city's choice to allow it or not allow it per this section. We're not making any changes. But Mike, do you want to describe the Redmond?
Sure. This is written more or less verbatim, the same as in Redmond. And the way, as well as in Kirkland, but in Kirkland, the difference is that they have set up a formula, and for fractional units, they allow people to use it if they want to pay for the fractional units. But I think your case might be closer to what is in Redmond, which is the city doesn't restrict the fees in lieu to just the fractional calculations of affordable units, but to all of the affordable units, if they convince the city that it's a good deal, basically. So to accept a fee in lieu of affordable housing, the city has to accept that or has to find that the fee would produce a better result for the public than having the affordable units on site. So Redmond allows developers to make a proposal. They have to back up that proposal with this justification that the city would get a better result. But the city's very focused on puts a high priority on having the affordable units in the same area of the the applicant's project. And so they have only agreed to this in a couple of cases, one down in Overlake and one downtown. And those were opportunities where the Arch was entertaining proposals for affordable, projects that would be 100% affordable, and funding was needed from Arch cities. And so the opportunity and timing were there for the city to accept, a big lump sum and apply it directly to that project that was virtually next door. And so that would be, I think, a way to describe how you might, Kenmore might use it, the fee in lieu.
Comments from the commissioners?
I think
Mr.
Commissioner
Commissioner
Mr.
Vanderland?
Mr. Vanderleen?
Thank you, Mike. That was very interesting. I've been thinking about this myself, and I like, in everything I've read about, I think there's good uses for fee in lieu. But I think, as Mike points out, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Mike, but the way I think about this is fee in lieu works if you have, as part of the agreement, identified up front how those funds are going to be used, or potentially you have established, city has established some sort of a trust fund with where those funds are dedicated to a specific purpose, particularly that those funds be used within a certain amount of time. Having it open-ended, the city gets a bunch of cash and then looks for something in the future to do with it. I don't think, that feels a little uncomfortable. So that would be my recommendation, that we make sure that when we use fee in lieu, which can be very useful, that it be for an already identified specific purpose within a specific set of time, or into a fund that ensures that the use is going to be there and appropriate.
So-
Mr. Lutis? Oh, okay, go ahead, Lori and Mike, go ahead and respond.
I was just going to ask if this language was adequate, or were you suggesting a change to the language? It basically says somebody can propose it and it can be used if approved by the city, basically. That allows a lot of flexibility, but I don't know if you were thinking that it was too much flexibility, or you think it needs to be more qualified?
Yes, too flexible, needs to be qualified. And the qualifications that I'm thinking about, curious to see what others might think, would be the funds have to be deposited into a specific account, which has specific policy uses for it. More preferable be as part of the proposal, the developer, in working with the city, comes up with a proposal for how that's going to be used to meet the policy of affordable housing, and how that would be used within the city of Kenmore, and it would be used within a specific period of time. Preferably, of course, just like the Redmond example, you would have already identified what that use is, so you have a direct correlation, and it's actually part of the agreement. What makes me concerned here is if you have too open-ended that says, well, we're going to keep this flexible, we'll go out and we'll find something to do with it in the future, and that's it. I'd prefer to see a little more direction, a little more structure on that.
Do other commissioners agree?
Well, we should have some more comments and then we'll.
Oh, okay. I'm going to stop sharing again so we can see.
No, that's okay. Mr. Lutzis.
Actually, I was reading off of that. Now I gotta.
No, oh, no.
No. That's okay. No. I pulled it up. I pulled it up in front of me. I have that now. I see Mike's point, but I also saw the line that says that the fee in lieu shall be used only for the subsequent preservation or provision of affordable housing units by the city or other housing provider approved by the city manager. I guess. Mike, that was a mouthful there, what you kind of said there. Is there any way to maybe refine that a little bit more or attach that to that line that was listed there or something. I'm curious to hear what you have to suggest, because if that second line wasn't there about shall be used only for the subsequent preservation or provision of affordable housing, I could see where that hesitation would be. But what were you thinking of potentially changing or adding to that idea or concept in the current policy?
Go ahead, Mike.
Which Mike are you referring to? I'll assume it's me.
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Don't really want to get into wordsmithing right now. What would be useful is I'd be curious, Mike Stanger, what does Redmond have in its code that led them to this sort of result? Do they have any? Be interested to know if there's some specific language out there. In lieu of that, I would have some language in there that says specifically that the city would expect that a proposal from a developer to use the fee in lieu would include a proposal on how those funds specifically would be used, or those funds would be put into a dedicated fund that's specifically created to fund this sort of development. And we'd have to have some specifics about what that would be. Is it 50%? What other requirements would be? So define here or refer here to otherwise in the section where we've talked about affordable housing. I just would like to tighten this up a little bit. So we don't have we're not creating funds that sit out there that could be used for creatively for a different purpose or be held for a period of time and not be used.
I could add that I believe Redmond's language is almost identical, if not verbatim the same. And so the city has acted under the guidance of, what you might call oral tradition, or, a long-standing understanding of what the city's priorities. And I think there are probably other sections of the code that speak to the city's priority for having units be on site or in the same neighborhood. So what I'd offer to do is to I'll bring that to you, and perhaps we talk to Lori about how to draft something that you might consider.
So the question before us is, do we want to try to include this for the public hearing, or are we going to put this in our memo that we're going to consider it after the public hearing as a technical issue?
I don't think you'd want to consider it after the public hearing. I think if you want to change, refine the language a little bit, we could work on bringing that back at your next meeting. I doubt if we'd have a whole administrative guide to using that language. I don't think we would actually want that, but we could provide perhaps a more refined discussion of what the proposal to do a fee in lieu should entail and how it would be spent. I think we could add something about that in the language for your consideration.
Commissioner Metapore.
Thank you so much, Chair Thompson. I definitely would appreciate much more, I think, conversation about this, especially, I think, looking at the pros and cons. I think it's intriguing, but I know in doing a little bit of reading on it, there's a particular white paper from the Urban Institute, which is dated May 2020, entitled Determining in Lieu Fees and Inclusion Zoning Policies. And some of the, I guess, the potential disadvantages of this particular practice is, and there's three that they call out specific. One is that it may result in fewer on-site units and less mixed income development. Also could lead to construction activity that reinforces patterns of segregation, and then may result in on or offsite units that are of lower quality. So I think that if we are to proceed with this, I think we really need to be able to consider the language and also the kind of the requirements that could mitigate these concerns.
All right, we see a lot of head nodding, and Commissioner Wyckoff.
Yeah, I've got 2 points on this as well. My concern is earlier I saw some verbiage on if a project was constructing units with affordable housing, that they would be completed around the same time as the rest of the building and they would not lag behind. So this fee in lieu could end up, if it were going into a money pot to be used at a later date, would circumvent that goal of providing the affordable housing at the same time of the completion of project. So the situation in Redmond did open my eyes to a plausible situation. If it was right next door and it was going to be finished in the same time frame, then yeah, that makes total sense, and they needed the money and there was the money. So I guess there are situations where that works, but I would want to see some sort of verbiage that if there were a fee in lieu accepted, that it were going to be along the same timelines as the original project. And my second comment is just Derek noting that every time you say fee in lieu, I'm thinking of an Australian pay toilet, but I rest.
Okay.
Oh, dear.
Any further comments? So I'm going, before I pose what we're going to do, Lori, what would you like with regard to this particular topic? What can we do and what could you do for us?
Yeah, well, I think I'm very interested in the white paper that Commissioner Metapor mentioned. So we'll take a look at that. I think, again, that Mike and I could try to craft language that gets to some of the concerns you've expressed, and we can bring that back at your next meeting for your consideration. I think that's probably the best approach. And in the staff memo, we can talk about the pros and cons, and that will give you the background you need.
If there's no objections, we'll do that. All right. And Mike, you started this, so is that good with you?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
All right. So since there's no one else who wants to talk, so I will take a lead. So on this similar topic, I've been kind of waiting on this. Alternative compliance. So just thinking about that 90% pervious surface deal. Now, I know that there are in other jurisdictions, a developer has to, to be allowed to do this, has to provide for a trade for a piece of property to be donated to the city that is in need of protection for the purpose of environmental, like we have some acres that need protection in our city. Are you familiar with those types of situations, Lori?
Well, that really deals with environmental protection and not affordable housing. This whole section is written about affordable housing provision, and the alternative compliance section talks about how you can comply with the affordable housing requirements in a different way than the standard. So it doesn't really get to any environmental issues like impervious surface or anything like that. Those standards are in the critical area rules, and we'll hear from Richard about what he thinks about possible incentives or other ideas to address that 90% impervious limitation. So this section wouldn't apply to that.
Right, I was just, the thought came up when I was thinking about alternative compliance, and I realized that this section is not the correct section, but when we were talking about the 90%,
Mhm.
I think most of the planning commission was slightly concerned about that.
Yeah, right. And those are the kinds of questions I'll talk with Richard about how is it currently met? Are there alternative ways to comply with it? Is this number too high? Should the number be adjusted to reflect alternative ways to handle it? So all those questions will be tackled as part of that review of the 90%.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
So we're moving on to affordability agreement.
Okay. I'm going to share the screen again. All right, so this section is really, there's no difference here. It was just, I wanted to include this so you could see the full section. The next change really has to do with expedited permit processing. And some of you were on the commission when we set out ways to expedite permits that included affordable housing. And so this section needed to be amended to, again, reflect the new definitions, but also add the urban residential zone to the list. So again, this is just to make the definitions consistent and add expedited permit processing in the UR zone to the list of places you could request this.
And the listed 5 items are, it prohibits.
Right, correct.
Right, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So I haven't, if there's no questions on that, I have a question for you, Lori.
Mhm.
So are you going to, we've gone through a lot of it, 27 pages now, and there was certain discussion about a couple items. Are you going to provide us a memo on those other items? Or I guess what I'm also saying is that we kind of nodded our heads on a couple items. Are you going to be bringing back slight amendments on those little items?
Yeah, so what I would do for your next meeting is make any changes that you clearly requested this evening. And then also provide information so you could decide what to do on some of the topics, for example, the impervious surface and the fee in lieu that you're not ready to make decisions on. So those things will come back to you at your next meeting for you to make preliminary recommendations on.
And so the actual changes will be in the memo.
No, well, if we're suggesting revised text, no, they probably would be actually in the text.
Okay.
And then a description of that in the memo.
Oh, I understand, but not the whole 51 pages, just the pages that are related to the change.
Yeah, I think probably what I would do is I will change all this blue text to yellow text. And then if we're making additional changes, again, put them in blue text. So it's very clear about any changes from your meeting today.
Great. And I'm just trying to figure this out because we'd like to go quickly through this next time. Okay, thank you very much. So are there any further comments on pages 1 through 27? Hearing none, we're on to page 28.
Okay, so this next section of amendments are the miscellaneous amendments, and there are a whole bunch of these. They either have to do with consistency or relocating standards from the TOD into appropriate chapters like parking and tree retention standards, or they are clarifications of how ARCH may apply affordable housing requirements. There's a whole, it's like a grab bag of amendments that need to be changed to fit with the new approach to the TOD standards. So, for example, in MFTE, there's this very last section that says the project shall comply with all applicable zoning, land use, building, and housing requirements contained in this code, including if the property is located in the TOD, shall comply with 1829 KMC, which is a TOD overlay, and other applicable zoning regulations. That doesn't need to be in here. There is no more chapter 1829 TOD overlay. So it creates a problem of understanding exactly what's meant. So that's a cleanup code amendment. The next one is zoning and map definitions. So we add urban residential, or UR, to the list of zoning designations because that's the new zone. Then these again are all just miscellaneous things. Fences, we have to add UR to the place where fences are discussed. We added it again where there's multifamily, DR, R24, R48. For marijuana businesses, we needed to add UR to the residential zones so that you can't have it marijuana business on a parcel, any parcel of which is within 200 feet of a residential zone. The underlying zones were these zones, so I thought it was appropriate to add UR here. Recreation space, we need to say where common recreational open space is added, and I most typically put it UR wherever downtown residential zoning was. Stop me at any time. I'm going through this quickly, I know. But again, it's miscellaneous amendments to add this new zone to the various standards that reference all the zoning districts. So here's Rockeries, we added urban residential. And then landscaping, we needed to talk about where does UR fall here? Surface parking areas and perimeter landscaping. Okay, the next most substantive section has to do with off-street parking spaces. So were there any questions about these ones that I just ran through so quickly? Otherwise, I'll spend more time with parking.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. So in the current parking rules, there are standards that talk about what you do if you exceed your minimum parking. And in certain zones, if you do that, you have to put that parking in a parking garage or screen it. And so I have taken this code section and added it later in the parking rules to also apply in the, it's down here, let me find it. Exceedance of minimum parking in downtown commercial, downtown residential, urban corridor, urban residential. So we retained that standard, but I just moved it and eliminated it where it appears in some earlier code sections. Then for parking, this is where we talked about 0.50 parking spaces per dwelling unit. You all chose to eliminate the Pioneer Project incentive. And then I left that same standard for guest parking, 0.50 stalls. I eliminated this parking space for affordable or senior dwelling units because our new standard at 0.50 is less than this. This is a state requirement that there are no minimum parking requirements for multifamily residential developments specifically for housing senior citizens or people with disabilities. We're following a state law that was passed a couple of years ago to put this in here. And we don't need these definitions because it's hyphenated here, and that leads one directly to the definition of senior citizen. Okay. I eliminated, I guess we talked about this last time, that I eliminated the standard about further reducing the parking in the TOD because you've already settled on the 0.50 stalls. We're encouraging shared parking. And then this is where we're saying that if you exceed the minimum parking requirement, you have to be in a parking garage, under building or screened from the frontage. Then we enter into a whole set of other changes where we had to add this urban residential zone to code sections. So here's one about residential code signs. We've already talked about elimination of the term downtown from the design standards. There's one exception to this, and that is that there were some recommended guiding principles. They were called recommended guiding principles general that really did relate specifically to downtown. So that section I retained and noted that that was for downtown specifically. That's this change here. So again, elimination of downtown. These are pedestrian walkway standards in the design guidelines. All this is design guidelines. And then significant tree grove retention. Development Services asked that the tree rules from the TOD overlay be moved into the tree management section, which makes total sense. So somebody wouldn't have to go to different zones to see what the tree rules, they're all together. So this specifies the area of the TOD, the new zones, and then here are the definitions. It defines it more carefully. Back to standard addition of UR to wireless communication standards. UR added to landscaping requirements. UR added to home industry requirements. And before I go further, this is a good time for me to stop and ask if anybody had questions about these before I go to residential density incentives.
I see no hands.
Okay. All right, residential
Commissioner Benezinski just raised her hand.
Go
Yes,
ahead, Tracy.
thank you. I raised my actual hand instead of the Zoom hand. I don't know which one gets me seen better. Yes, Lori, can you please remind me about why we decided to go with lower parking minimums rather than parking maximums?
Right. The discussion was how could we achieve 50% or 25% of units at 50% of median income. And I think it was Commissioner Lutzis who suggested we look at a reduced parking standard to make the dials work so that it was feasible for someone to build a project. So that's where we ended up with minimum density. There are other rules in the parking chapter. Let me go back up here. So we already talked about if you exceed the minimum parking, that you have to put it in a garage. But there's another standard, and I hope I can find it easily, that talks about here it is. Maximum parking shall not exceed the minimum requirement calculated under the regular provisions. So there is a maximum parking. So you can go to 0.50 stall per unit, but if you use the regular chart, which may require 1 stall per 2-bedroom unit or whatever it is, if you exceed, you can't exceed that. So there is a minimum and a maximum. And if you exceed the minimum, it has to be in a garage.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Laurie.
Commissioner Lutz's.
This has to go with tree retention, Lori, and I just
Okay.
had a clarifying question.
Sure.
Since it's not included here regarding KMC 1857060, excuse me, 060, which is a translation of diameter at breast height.
Yeah.
I remember reading through this and thinking to myself, well, what is diameter at breast height? And then, but I see that it's linked to 1857060, but it's not included in this packet. So I'm just curious to know for my own sake what that actually is defined as.
Diameter at breast height.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I can tell you the answer to that, but you'll have to let me grab my zoning code here.
Breast height for a 4-year-old.
Well, that's the thing is that it's
Just kidding.
in the way it's referenced. It's so I was curious to know what the city has
They
defined
have something.
for that.
Okay, so the diameter at breast height is a defined term. And I'm hoping it's under DI. Sometimes these things, diameter at breast height means a tree's diameter in inches at 4 1/2 feet above the ground. On multiple stemmed or trunked trees, the diameter shall be the sum of diameters of all individual stems or trunks.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. Just the term itself is it's it doesn't sound like there's a specific definition to it, but the city does have one, and so I was curious what that would be.
Yeah, interestingly, what we should do is in this particular section, I should italicize that because definitions are supposed to be italicized. That would be helpful, huh? So let me make a note and we will italicize diameter of breast height. Okay.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay, any other questions before I jump into residential density incentives?
So once we move into that, folks, are we all good? Except for those items that we're going to come back, that Lori's going to come back to us next week that she's already committed to. All
Not
right.
next week. It'll be a couple of weeks here. October
Not next. Oh, my goodness.
next week.
Next week. Okay.
I
So
believe,
I
I believe Commissioner Banazinski had her hand up.
go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Sammy. I just want to make sure because I'm getting confused, honestly, about where we are. I had a comment about the roofs, but that may be in the next section. I just don't want to miss saying it if
About, pardon me, say again? About what?
Roofs.
Roofs.
Yeah, on page 37. Are we there yet? Or we're not there yet?
Yes, we've passed it.
We passed it. Okay.
Okay, so let's go back to page 37.
This is related to my wondering about the impervious percentage of impervious surface that we have in the that kind of downtown area, TOD area. I wonder if there are ways we could think about roofs more creatively. Is my Midwestern accent coming out there?
So what's code section?
It's 18.52.220. It's on page 37 and 38. It's at the very bottom of 37. And then for me, when I printed it, it spilled over to 38.
Okay. 18.52. My page numbers don't.
Oh, my.
match.
18.52.
18.52.220 roof form,
Yeah.
correct.
Form. I am curious about how much discussion there's been in our community about how to use roofs as a kind of green infrastructure, like green roofs and such.
Yeah, I would say that that is definitely climate action plan.
Great.
Part of the climate action plan discussion.
Yeah, okay.
This really is looking at aesthetics
Design,
and pedestrian friendly development. So
I think it would be very aesthetically pleasing if we have green roofs.
yes.
Very exciting. Okay, I'm glad that's going to be discussed in the climate action plan. I will.
Right. Yeah, I think the whole green roof is all related to the
Okay.
stormwater issues.
I'll try to rein in my enthusiasm for it then.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So we're good on that, correct?
Looks like it.
Okay, so what page are we ready to start again on?
So I am on page 50, and I hope in your attachment that you also were on page 50.
That
Where
looks
we're
like-
talking about 1880-020, permitted locations of residential density incentives.
Okay. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So this section, this is one, again, where we had to add urban residential. This is another place where people, this is a code section that allows people to get additional units if they provide a certain type of housing. And so this is another case where we had to specify different affordable housing levels that match our new definitions. So benefit units consisting of rental housing permanently affordable to very low income households versus price to serve low income households, etc., at 50%. So these changes again are just to reflect those new definitions in the affordable housing chapter. Again, here's another one. Households with incomes at or below 70%. So I just want to clarify for you that these are not changes to the expectations. It's changes to match those new definitions that we're using. And here's another one about owner-occupied housing. This is a new section. This is one that doesn't currently exist, which says that affordable housing units provided through residential and density incentives shall remain affordable housing for a minimum of 50 years from the date of initial sale of owner-occupied or the life of the project if renter-occupied. That's a standard ARCH requirement as they monitor our affordable housing units. So we thought we should put it in to make it clear. So this is a new change that to make it consistent with ARCH housing practices.
Commissioners.
Commissioner Vanderland has his hand
Commissioner
up.
Vanderleen.
Yes, Laurie, what is the definition of life of the project? What's the definition of the project?
Well, it would be, for example, if you had an apartment building and at some point I suppose it would become dilapidated or it would actually wear out. I mean, that's what I would assume.
If
That
it's
the
being
life
used
of the
for
project.
housing.
Pardon me?
Yes, if it stops being used for housing.
Oh, there we go. That's good, Mike. I'm so glad
then
you're
the
here.
Project is over. Right?
Yeah. So,
Okay, so if it's converted to a different use.
okay, could we say that? Because project could mean a lot of different things, particularly 50 years down the line.
As long as use doesn't mean gentrified.
Yeah, we
Well,
might have to think about how
There you go.
to phrase that.
Say life of the use or something.
Like what's happening to the CD district.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Lori, relatedly, it does the provision that it must remain affordable housing for a minimum of 50 years from the date of initial sale, does that preclude? Like how do we protect that housing? What if somebody wanted to demolish the house after 10 years, for example?
Yeah, I'm going to let
Does that
Mike
work?
answer this question.
Well, Right. So it might help to remember that these are land use requirements, right? So if the owner stops using them for that land use, then they don't get the benefit or the obligations of that land use any longer. So that's why it's tied to the use as housing. Thought I had a follow-up comment, but I can't think of it right now. Oh, you asked how do we ensure that home ownership units are maintained as affordable or something like that?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about how if, there are pressures on land to do more and to, that somebody might be incentivized to stop using the land for housing and sell it for a high price to, I don't know, for something that's not housing. And then we've lost that affordable housing. That's what the line of thinking that I'm going down.
Mike, don't they sign a covenant that requires that they maintain it?
Well, if it's a home ownership unit, then carries a covenant between the homeowner and the city. A homeowner has a lot more restrictions, natural restrictions, you could call them, that would tend to prevent them from tearing down their house and trying to do something else with the property. But through the code, you would have still the regulations in place that they would have to make, some portion of that affordable in some way. In the case of a multifamily development, I guess my first thought is, and I'm probably not thinking this thoroughly, but if the market became such that the land was more valuable for a commercial use than for a residential use, then perhaps the city wouldn't be needing an affordable housing requirement anymore.
Is there any follow-up on that? Okay, and I understood that there would be something recorded with the title. That's what I was
correct.
told once before.
Right. So in the case of an owner-occupied unit, the homeowner has the covenant with the city. It's recorded on the land and appears on title. And every time that person goes to resell the unit, then they have to notify us. We will set the maximum resale price and determine the maximum income and household size for the next buyer. And then we ensure that at closing, the new buyer signs that covenant as well.
And so for renter occupied, like an apartment building, and we have, say, 25% of the units at 50% of median, that requirement carries on as long as it's an apartment building. But I think what you're saying is if for some reason it would convert to another, for some reason it suddenly became more valuable as an office use, for example, that we would not have a control over the affordable units.
That's what I'm asking. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm wondering if we could end up losing affordable housing because there's not the protection that we need to maintain it despite pressures on the land.
I'm struggling to think of a case I've seen where housing has been converted to a different use. It'd be more likely that it'd be torn down. But again, the market conditions that would create that situation, I think, would be such that housing values and housing demand had cratered in essence, and that there would be plenty of affordable housing. That would sound like almost apocalyptic.
Is there any further discussion on this point? Hearing
My
none.
original question is, can we get a little more specific definition of what project means?
Sure.
You know, is it the life of the property? Is it the life of the structure?
It would be the life of the use, the residential use.
That would be great. Maybe have something in there like a minimum of 50 years or something like that, so that we have some definition of what that means.
Okay. You got that, Lori?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
So hearing no further discussion on this point or anything else in the last 50-some pages. So Lori, is it possible just in bullet point format, let us know what items you're coming back to us next week with possible amendments?
Sure. So we didn't really talk about this last one, but all this change did was to add urban residential to the opportunity to do a development agreement.
Right, we saw that.
Yeah. Okay, so are you asking me right now to do this bullet point list?
Yes, because you've been making a list. I saw that pen working very hard over there.
All right, so I'm just going to go page by page and tell you what I have. It's not in any particular order. I am going to italicize diameter at breast height in the tree section. I am going to come back with information from Richard Sawyer about impervious surfaces, that 90% requirement in the downtown commercial zone. Find out whether impervious surfaces are addressed in the CAP, and whether there are incentives or other ways to incorporate green stormwater systems in downtown commercial impervious surface. I am going to add missing middle housing to the prohibition on townhomes in areas where that's appropriate. Don't give up. I am going to amend the section on the urban residential zone to add in the different level of affordability for homeownership housing. We are going to bring back information on fee in lieu and refine that language and talk about pros and cons based on a May 2020 Urban Institute white paper. Now you asked me to page through 52 pages, so I'm not going to make excuses for this. And we are going to discuss life of the project. What does that mean? And what kind of conditions would dictate whether housing units would be lost? That's what I have.
That's it. Is there any items that a commissioner would like to be added to that list? Hearing none, then without objection, attachment 1 would be ready for public hearing with the exception of the changes which Lori is going to bring to us at our next meeting. Is there any objection to that action? Hearing none, the action is adopted. Okay,
Great. And I'm assuming that confirms that we should go ahead and schedule the hearing for October 18th. Is the commission comfortable with that? Or if you're not comfortable, we can schedule it after you look at the changes at the next meeting.
I have not heard an inkling from any of the commissioners that they would want to slow you down, Lori. And yes, we're going to have we've talked about October 18th for quite a bit. So if anyone's not going to be here, please let staff and myself know. Okay. So, pardon? We're okay. Anything for the good of the order? Hearing none, our next meeting is October 4th. And we have not only you want to talk, Lori, go ahead.
I don't really want to talk. I just want to invite you all to the Karen Perolik presentation tomorrow night at 7:00. It is online. You could view it in the council chambers, but you also can view it online. She will not be in the council chambers. Anyway, that's at 7, and she's going to talk about missing middle housing. So.
Thank you very much. And Lori, thank you for all the work that you've done for getting us through tonight, including all your note-taking and patience and detailed explanations. It's really wonderful. And Commissioner Lutsis has something to say.
I just wanted to quickly second that. Thank you, Lori, for all your hard work, and Mike Stanger, you too. Thank you so much. And Lori, I was wondering just briefly if you could give us an update on where the city council is with the last set of recommendations that are going through, since I know that that's been on kind of an interesting journey.
Yeah, so the most fundamental change, and I'm sure you've all heard of it, and you should have received a flyer, in fact, in your mailbox that talks about the Karen Perolik presentation and the public hearing. That flyer was mailed to all addresses in the city, so I hope you got it. But anyway, the City Council is considering expanding the allowance for duplexes and triplexes to all of the R6 zoning district. That's a significant change from your recommendations. So they will be holding a public hearing on the 26th about that.
All right, so there's nothing more for the good of the order. So I said October 4th is the next meeting, and then October 18th will be our public hearing, and then we'll be happy to move to November. So with that, the meeting for tonight is adjourned. See, I had something. Great. Oh, look at Mike. He's going, what was that? Well, they left one for me. All right, so long.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Good night.